Tales from the Kitchen. At night, it was our custom to assemble around the wood stove in Danya Sylvia's house to listen to stories, tell our dreams, relate our experiences, and discuss topics of interest for the apprentices. During the first phase of my stay among the healers, I believed them to be a sort of religious brotherhood. Later, I believed for a while that they were relatives. Still later, however, I discovered that they were much more than that. On one of those occasions, Don Melchior and two very strange old men came to visit us. In the light of the oil lamp, the visitors cast weird shadows. From where I sat, I was able to focus my attention on them. At first, the shadows appeared to flicker with the glow of the fire, but after a while, I noticed they were moving differently from other shadows in the room. Everyone was concentrating on the conversation. I felt as if the shadows, realizing that I had noticed they were different, surged towards me threateningly. I let out a tremendous scream that interrupted the meeting. The assistants surrounded me, wanting to know what the matter was. Feeling that I was slowly returning to my senses, I apologized and told them I'd been dreaming awake. They all laughed. After the meeting, I discussed what I had seen with some of my fellow assistants. It turned out I had been the only one who had seen the two old men. When I questioned Don Melchior about it, he told me dryly that they were his allies. The first time Don Melchior took me to his house in the state of Veracruz, I was surprised to see how fine it was. It was, in fact, an enormous house of very good quality, completely opposite from what they had in the state of Morelos. I asked him about that, but he misinterpreted my questions. Believing I wanted to know where he got the money for all that, he told me an extraordinary story. He said that an inorganic being visited him once, a ghost who told him that, while alive, he used to be a rich landowner's farmland. One day, his boss ordered him and his mate to drag a heavy truck up to a very isolated area near a sharply pointed rock. The boss commanded them to dig a large hole, carefully lower the truck down to the bottom, and bury it. While they were in the middle of the task, the old man pulled out a gun and shot them, killing them both. The greedy rich man did not want witnesses. He said the discarnate being told him that the old man, while covering their corpses with soil, had put a charm on them to make them guard his treasure to the end of time. The souls of the two laborers hadn't been able to free themselves of the enchantment ever since. They appeared to Don Melchior and told him the secret of the buried treasure in order to break the power of the spell and thus escape their chore. Don Melchior went up to the place the troubled spirit had indicated and excavated the spot. Close to the surface, he found the human bones, and then further down, the already rotten trunk full of gold doubloons. I had already heard similar stories, and had never believed a word. This time, however, there was physical proof of the claim, so I had to accept the story as true. At that time, to accept an idea like that was for me equivalent to accepting the existence of another world inhabited by the dead. My hair stood up, and I tried to think of something else. To change the subject, I told Don Malcor the purpose of my original question was to find out the reason behind the enormous discrepancy between his two lifestyles. With an expression of understanding, he laughed and replied that healers had to be very detached and fluid, and the strategy of living a simple life in the mountains helped them stay that way. Page 127. The humility of Akin. Shortly after my arrival at the healer's house, Daniel Silver drew my attention to the fact that my hair was too long and that I was in need of a good trim. She offered to cut my hair. I looked at her suspiciously, but she explained with a serious expression that it was mostly she who gave the assistants their haircuts. I cherished my hair, which for me was an important element of my identity. To reassure myself, I asked her again if she was sure that she knew how to do the job. With a confident tone, she replied she was an expert hairdresser. So, albeit with some apprehension, I let her cut my hair. As she worked on, I felt a snip and saw a large amount of hair fall to the ground. Doña Silvia let out a scream and told me she had done something inconceivably clumsy. I ran to look at myself in a mirror, but then remembered there were none in the house. In my despair, I looked into the rearview mirror of the disintegrating old truck that was being used as an improvised henhouse. Seeing my reflection, I realized Doña Silvia had cut off a massive tuft of my hair, literally leaving my scalp bare on the most visible part of my skull. That hugely upset me, but I saw no other remedy than to allow her to continue cutting until I was left completely bald. For me, being bald was like walking around naked. At first, I felt awful and unnatural with myself. But then the lesson took effect, and I understood how trivial it was to base my internal well-being on physical appearance. The stories healers told were generally intended to teach us how to treat diseases. Occasionally, however, they told local folk tales that always had a moral about the warrior's way and the life in general. One night, Doña Silvia told us the story about the pyramid on the hilltop, clearly visible from the village. She explained the ancients had built it to honor a king who had ruled those lands in the past. She said, at that time, the government was in the hands of seers and sages who served as beacons for the people. It was not like it's today when any crook can grab the power. But we'll talk about that some other day. Adopting the tone used by traditional storytellers, Daniel Silva began. They say long ago there was a young virgin who was as beautiful within as she was of appearance. Her black hair was smooth and very long. Her eyes were dark and shiny. In her presence, one could feel the fragrance of spring. The little birds sang to her in a chorus, and in her wake, the flowers opened and exhaled their perfumes. Daniel Silva pointed to a south-facing window and said, she lived in one of the glens in that direction. Her name was Chaimali. It happened that on one occasion, the beautiful girl went to fetch water from the river not too far away from her village. She took a shortcut straight through the woods, and there she met the spirit of the forest. Praising her beauty and the sweet look in her eyes, the spirit gave her an obsidian pebble and said it would bring her good luck. Then the spirit disappeared, and she went on. Having filled her jug with clear water, she made her way back home. She kept the pebble she got from the forest spirit in her mouth under her tongue, but it so happened, in an unguarded moment, she swallowed the pebble. As time went by, she realized the stone had been enchanted since she had become pregnant. The wise rulers of her village saw Chaimali's aura and realized that she was telling the truth and that her pregnancy had been brought about by the spirit. They took that as an omen. In due time, Chaimali gave birth to a son who became the king of his people. Tepoztecal was his name, and he was a king so wise that his fame spread way beyond the frontiers of his land. From everywhere, people came to hear his words. The story tells that on one occasion, the great king was invited to a banquet at the royal court of Tenochtitlan, which was located where Mexico City is today. He arrived dressed in his usual way, wearing his humble lion clothes and leather sandals, but he was not allowed in. He then returned home and put on fine clothes, gold, jewels, and precious feathers. Thus attired, he returned to the party. This time, he was admitted in and seated alongside the other nobles. During the meal, out of the blue and to everyone's astonishment, King Tepoztecal began smearing food on his clothes and ornaments. When asked why he was doing it, he replied, it was not he who had been invited to the banquet, but his clothes and jewelry. The others were profoundly embarrassed. The lesson of this story is that we must look beyond appearances. Unlike this baldy here, Doña Sylvia said, pointing at me, who believes that only external appearances matter. Modern man has abandoned his good sense in favor of vanity. He has become a puppet of fashion and behaves like a clown, only without even the slightest sense of the ridiculous. It clearly shows how people continue to follow the propaganda blindly without ever questioning anything, and are thus mercilessly manipulated by hidden forces. The price for emphasizing any aspect of the ego is to remain locked up in the chosen detail. Lack of awareness makes the masses behave mechanically and follow stereotypes. Watching them, one doesn't know whether to laugh or cry.